Hi there, welcome back to our third installment of setting in sleeves and sewing together a cardigan using mattress stitch. I have finished my shoulder seams. I've set in both of my sleeve caps to each arm, and my next step is to work the side and sleeve seams of the sweater. Now, oftentimes people will come to me and assume that they need to start at the cuff and work their way up to the underarm, or start at the bottom of the sweater and work their way up to the underarm. That is not what I do. I start at the underarm using those leftover tails from setting in my sleeve cap. If you'll recall, we set in the cap flat and worked out half and then the other half, leaving these long tails of yarn at the underarms. I'm going to use those tails now to seam the side and sleeve seams. So usually what I do is I figure out which tail is longer, and if there is one that's longer, if they're not perfectly even, that's totally fine. And I use that one to seam whichever side of the sweater is longer. So in this case, I think my sleeves are a little longer than the body. Yeah, I just folded them next to each other, and the sleeves are a little longer, so I'll use the longer strand for the sleeves. Makes sense, right? Okay, I'm going to thread the yarn onto my tapestry needle. And now for both side and sleeve seams, it should be smooth sailing. Let's hope that you worked your increases on your sleeves at least one stitch from the edge, and because otherwise you'll have a tricky time getting over those increases. They're not as smooth as the regular stitches are. And your sleeves are going to be easy because you'll definitely have the same row count on each side. It's just one piece of fabric. So what's 100 rows on this side is 100 rows on that side. When we get to doing the body, if you haven't counted your rows to the underarm before you started, when you were knitting your piece, you may have a couple extra rows on one side, and I'll talk about how to deal with that. For now, let's seam the sleeve. So I've got my yarn threaded on my tapestry needle, and I'm right here at the underarm on the top. So I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm picking up one row, one bar, right by the seam. And then doing the same on the top. All right, that's just to get us started. So you'll notice I'm uncurling the edge because it curls quite a bit. And I'm also going to start taking 2 bars at a time. So 2 is the maximum. You never want to take more than 2. You can take either 1 or 2 bars, but I'm going to dive right in here and scoop up 2 bars. Phew, excuse me. All right, here we go. So dive in the hole that the yarn is coming out of and scoop up the next 2 bars. And you want to make sure that you're staying in the same column of stitches the entire time. Otherwise, this seam looks a little wonky. We're diving in, scooping up 2 bars. Here I attached a tail, so this bar's a little tight, but that's okay. Dive in, scoop up 2. Uncurl with your hands, dive in, scoop up 2. So we're diving in the same hole that this yarn is coming out of, and then dive deep and scoop up. Even if you scoop up 3 bars, just drop that last bar off. And you're going to work that way the whole way down. So now if you have done your increases right at the edge of the work, you're not going to have this smooth edge that I have encountered here. You're going to have a little bit of a jutting out every time you did an increase. So just do your best there to kind of get past it to the rows where they are, where everything is smooth, and use those jutting out as almost mile markers for yourself to make sure that both sides that jut out match up with each other so that your increases match up with each other. Here it happens a bit automatically. Let's see again, I waited for you at home. I waited a little too long to pull. I would pull more frequently than that, but you'll see my increases right here and here match up with each other across the way. So you just want to make sure that your increases match up if you happen to have done them on the side of on the exact edge of the work. And hopefully you'll know for next time to work that increase at least 1 stitch in. I usually put mine 2 stitches in. because I like to leave no room for funky seams. So I'm going all the way down till I get to the ribbing, and then we'll figure out what's happening there, where we start combining knits and purl stitches. Here it's been simple in a sense because it's all stockinette stitch. Really our rows, whether you're knitting or purling, there's going to be a bar here. Sometimes if you're purling, it's just more dimensional. It pops out a bit more. It looks like a little bit of a bump rather than a bar. But rows still exist whether you are purling a stitch or knitting a stitch. All right, again, I went a while, but if you're new to seaming, pull more frequently so that if you encounter any hiccups there, you can fix it without having to rip out too much. All right, loosen up. And now here we go. I'm just about at the ribbing. Right here on this side I'm going to take a single bar here just to slow down. I noticed I'm really close to my ribbing here and a little less close here. All right, now that I've gotten right here to my ribbing, I'm going to take this little bump here, the purl bump on one side, and then the bar here right next to the knit stitch. So I've got a purl bump and a knit bar, a purl bump and a knit bar on the wrist of this sweater. Purl bump, knit bar, single to single here I'm going rather than the 2 to 2, which I was doing here. It's more obvious in the reverse stockinette if you pick up 2 bars at a time or 2 bumps. So I'm just taking it slow until I've run out on both sides of bars to take, which I have, and bumps to take. So I'm going to tighten that up. All right, and now I have this finishing yarn, this like kind of contrast yarn right here at the cuff. What I do with that is I push my needle, so my needle's on the top half of the cuff right now. I'm going to push it right down the corner of the bottom side and then right down on the top. And that's the sleeve seam. Again, I don't weave in tails till the very end in case there's some reason I need to rip out or undo the seam, etc. If there's some reason. Also because I just really don't like doing tails, so why do that throughout the project when you can just save it all for one really good episode of some show or something, or a podcast. All right, now here I am at the underarm again. I've picked up the other strand of yarn and I'm going to go down the side seam of my sweater. So it's really handy that you've got this finishing yarn right here at the underarms, and we're just going to go straight down the side seam. So I grabbed the first bar on each side right under the underarm, and now I'm going to be taking 2 bars to 2 bars the whole way down. Oop, and actually here my tension is funky. I know I mentioned that in one of the other videos. Here I'm noticing that I've got sort of these 2 bars that are close together frequently. So these 2 are connected and those 2 are connected. I'm going to take a single bar to offset the connected bars. Now that sounds funky, what I just said, but I'd prefer to kind of take these 2 bars and connect these 2 rather than seaming these and these. It just makes for a nicer seam. And that was a very nuanced thing. And it may not be relevant to you right now. Perhaps after a couple more sweaters of seaming, if you notice you have a tension issue like that on the edge of your work, you can revisit this and see if it makes sense what I did. But basically I split it up so that I wasn't grabbing these closer bars. I was working one of these and one of those, and thereby splitting up the close bars so that the seam wouldn't be bunched up at all those close bar points. All right, so again, every couple inches you pull tight. Looks beautiful, if I do say so myself. Here we go. Going down. So now, as you get about halfway down, if you did not count rows to your armhole, you're going to want to give it a look and see if your two sides match up. If you notice a discrepancy, like let's say, hopefully it's not this extreme, but if you notice a discrepancy and one side is shorter than the other, what you can do is occasionally take a single bar from the shorter side. So we'll pretend this side was shorter for right now. I would just take a single here, then 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then another single. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, another single. And each time you take a single bar, it helps spread out those extra rows from up here. So it helps spread out the fewer rows that you have on the shorter side. Again, I counted, so I know that I've got exactly the same number of rows on each side, on my front and my back. Another kind of tip to jot down for your next sweater that you knit, try to count the rows on the back and then just knit your fronts to that same row count. That way you don't even need to measure the fronts, and you know that when you're seaming it, everything will match up and you don't even have to try to fit anything in, which is one of those things that makes seaming more complicated. So the more planning you do while you knit, the better off you'll be while you seam. All right, so I pulled that tight. After I pull tight, I kind of try to give a little tug there to loosen up. Now here I am again at the ribbing. Let's see what we're looking at here. All right, I've got a knit column right here that I can go right next to and a purl column right there. So I'm going to grab a single bar and a single bump. Single bar, single bump. Single bar, single bump, and so forth. Single bar and single bump. I'm matching up a purl column right next to a knit column so that my ribbing will look like it just keeps going and going. You won't be able to tell. Oh, I split a stitch right there, so I'm going to undo that one, fix it. So I'm matching up the purl column right next to the knit column so that you won't even be able to tell where the seam was here. All right, and I've gotten to the very end. I'm going to pull tight, so I've grabbed the last bar and the last bump that I possibly could. And when you get to that last stitch on this side here, you're going to insert your needle down into the corner and down here into the corner of the other side. And then just pull tight to connect the two edges. Later on, you can weave these tails together into the seam in the back of the work. And I should show you what these seams look like, huh? This is the seam in the back of the work. So you can weave your tails right into there. Anywhere that you've added a tail in the sweater, hopefully it's been near a corner or near a seam so that you can weave right into there. I did have a few spots on my piece where I had to attach yarn in the middle of the row. There was a knot in the yarn, etc. So when I weave those in, I'll show you in the next installment how to weave those in. This one happens to be on the hood, which is what we're covering next. So I'll see you in a few minutes.